I'm Lauren Mitchell. That Thanksgiving dinner, when everyone raised their glasses in a cheerful toast, my sister let out a laugh and turned to the entire table. Thank goodness no one in this family has to live on a farm, except one person. The room fell silent for a split second, then erupted into laughter like it was the joke of the year. I sat there beside my husband, the man who had stood by me through every season, every storm, and felt like my family had just cast me out of their circle with one sentence. They had no idea that the very land they called mud was feeding millions. Have you ever been dismissed by your own family just because you chose a different path? Share your story in the comments. And if you want to hear the full journey I've walked through, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because this is just the beginning. I was once the Carter family's greatest hope. From elementary school, I was the obedient one, the straight-A student, always at the top of my class. My teachers called me the kid with a scientist's brain, and my parents proudly bragged to the neighbors about my academic awards like they were the family's legacy. But all of that changed the day I said I wanted to study environmental biology. My father, a senior accountant, looked at me over the rim of his glasses and set down his coffee. Why not major in finance like your sister? What can you do with biology? Analyze trees. My mother said nothing, just kept texting, but I knew she was listening. Vanessa, my older sister, was in her senior year of public relations. She always knew how to control her smile, adjust her tone to match the room. To our parents, she was the ideal. Polished, ambitious, clearly mapped out, and most importantly, not impulsive like me. I stayed quiet, swallowing the lump in my throat. I'd earned a full scholarship to a prestigious school in New Hampshire for environmental biology. That wasn't just an achievement, it was my passion. I loved the soil, the plants, the self-healing ecosystems I used to read about from faded library books. But a year and a half into college, I started to feel myself being pulled off that path. My mom began sending me articles about job markets, salary charts comparing scientists to finance professionals. Dad emailed suggestions that I switch majors. Vanessa texted things like, "You should be more practical. Living for ideals is nice, but living for bills is adulthood." I pushed through until my junior year, but my heart wasn't in it anymore. I withdrew from school, signed up for an online course on regenerative agriculture, and took an unpaid internship at a small farm in Minnesota. My family saw it as betrayal. "I can't believe you gave up a prestigious scholarship just to go grow vegetables," my mother screamed over the phone when I told her. "Have you lost your mind, Lauren?" I didn't answer, just listened to the wind beating against the window of the tiny shared room I rented with 4 other farm hands. I cried after that call, but not out of regret. That's when I met Jake, a man who, like me, had come to the farm for an internship, but with a different gaze. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people stopped to listen. Jake used to be a software engineer, but left the city after losing his mother to a respiratory illness he believed was linked to poor food quality in the supply chain. We met turning soil by hand, talking about restoring the land without chemicals. Something between us grew, quietly, without needing anyone to name it. 3 years later, Jake and I got married in a simple ceremony with farm co-workers and neighbors I had once helped start garden beds. I wore a rented dress, Jake wore a white shirt and a tie his mother had sewn. I sent invitations to my family. Not a single one came. On our wedding day, I checked my phone one last time and saw the only message from my mother: "Don't be surprised if you have to call for money in a few years. I just hope you wake up in time." Jake gently squeezed my hand as I set the phone down. "It's okay," he said. "Today is ours." After the wedding, we moved to Iowa, where Jake's grandfather had once lived, and inherited 10 acres of abandoned land. The soil was cracked, weeds everywhere, and the wooden house looked ready to fall. Locals called it the ghost lot. Nobody wanted it. But to us, it was the beginning. On our first day, I stood in the middle of the field and looked up at the gray sky, one question looping in my head: can we actually do this? Jake came up behind me holding 2 old shovels. "We don't need to answer that today," he smiled. "As long as we start." We lived in that wooden house with no air conditioning, thin walls, chopping firewood for heat in winter, blocking summer heat with thick, worn fabric. But each morning, I'd wake to the sound of roosters and see Jake quietly noting soil samples and checking moisture with DIY equipment he made from salvaged parts. We planted row by row, tracked every tiny change in soil fertility, experimented with compost made from eggshells and coffee grounds. Bit by bit, the soil healed. The plants grew. And through all that time, my family never called. Not a single word. I knew they thought I'd failed. One rainy night, water dripped through the roof into the living room. Jake was reading and looked at me. "Do you regret it?" he asked. I glanced around. The table we built ourselves, muddy boots by the door, the smell of damp earth and sweet potatoes roasting. "No. I don't regret it." That's when our long journey began. A journey no one but us believed in. And from that point on, I understood that sometimes, not being loved the right way teaches you how to love yourself properly. But I never imagined the very people who once dismissed me would come back knocking, begging for help. And when they did, they had no idea the vegetable growers they once mocked weren't quite who they remembered anymore. For the first 3 years, Jake and I lived in an old mobile home next to the land. In winter, cold air slipped through the cracks and I slept in 3 shirts and 2 blankets. In summer, the metal roof got so hot we cooked outside to keep the place from turning into an oven. But through all of it, Jake never once complained. We did everything by hand. Jake tilled the soil, tested pH levels, and rigged water lines from salvaged pipes. I planted seeds, tested new row configurations, recorded changes in moisture and growth. At night, with my hands still smelling of earth, Jake sat beside me coding the first version of a smart irrigation monitor, which eventually became the foundation of our first product. Some nights, I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and find Jake still at his desk, slumped over a pencil-drawn circuit sketch stained with spilled coffee. I'd quietly drape a coat over his shoulders. He never had to say anything. Everything ran on a kind of quiet faith. We spent nearly a year building a simple prototype, a moisture-sensing drip irrigation system that adjusted automatically for soil zones. Most parts came from junk Jake salvaged from abandoned farms. When it finally worked, I cried like a child, not from pride but because I realized we could actually make a difference. Even a small one. From that success, we expanded the design, slowly filed for patents. Everything under Jake Stone's name, so no one in the industry would trace it back to the name Mitchell. Not out of fear, but because we wanted to see how the world reacted to tech that came from just a couple of nobodies with dirt under their nails. We founded the company on a March afternoon, parked in our beat-up truck outside the local post office, filling out paperwork. Our startup capital was $1,200. Everything left from our wedding gifts. I remember Jake holding up the form and half-joking, eyes slightly wet. "If this fails, at least we have land to grow salad and survive." We named it Verdant Tech Incorporated, short for Verdant Technology, meaning lush, green, alive. Over the next 3 years, everything changed. We cold emailed small farms, offering free installations of our test version in exchange for honest feedback. A few said yes, out of curiosity or because their land was so depleted they had nothing to lose. Results came faster than we imagined. Yields increased. Water costs dropped nearly 50%. Word spread like wildfire. Calls came in from Nebraska, Missouri, Wisconsin. We didn't need marketing, farmers told each other. They didn't care about flashy presentations. They wanted something that worked, and we had that. We hired 2 young engineers from the local university, then expanded to 3 more operations staff. The company headquarters was a renovated wooden house turned into a small office with satellite internet and whiteboards covered in formulas. I managed customer relations and technical training, while Jake continued developing the technology. By the 5th year since founding, Verdant Tech had a presence on over 100 farms across the Midwest. Revenue was steady enough for us to invest in new equipment, upgrade our server systems, and most importantly, complete the paperwork to apply for a research grant from the Department of Agriculture. And yet, at every rare family gathering, whenever I visited Illinois or was invited to weddings or birthday parties, we were still referred to as the farm couple. I remember one occasion clearly. It was at Vanessa's daughter's wedding. I wore a light blue dress I loved, and Jake had on a white shirt with a silver-gray tie. We had barely stepped in when I heard Vanessa laugh and say to a friend, "Where does Lauren live again?" "Oh right, the turnip and wheat farm. Must be a blast." I didn't respond. Jake just gave a polite nod and pulled out a chair at the far end of the table. The rest of that evening, people asked me things like, "So, you're still farming?" Or, "Sold anything this season?" With that same pitying tone people use for the unlucky cousin everyone tiptoes around. I had grown used to the silence. What I wasn't used to was how, after every gathering like that, I needed a full week to scrape off the feeling that I still wasn't good enough. No matter how many financial reports, purchase orders, or emails from major agricultural institutions I had, one careless comment from family still cut deep. I once asked Jake, "Is it wrong that I still want their approval?" He put his hand gently on my shoulder and said, "It's not wrong. You just need to know their approval doesn't make you more valuable, just like lacking it doesn't make you any less." Still, I often wondered, if one day they found out everything, what would they say? Would they see us as people who had risen above, or still just the lucky pair who happened to own profitable land? The answer came sooner than I expected. And when it came, it didn't come with an apology. It came through an unfamiliar call, from the one person who hadn't called me in nearly 3 years. Vanessa. Her voice trembled so much I had to ask 3 times, "Why are you calling me?" "Lauren, I need your help." The call came one morning in June while I was standing in the tomato garden, basket in hand. The familiar ringtone rang from the phone sitting on the wooden porch table. I rushed over thinking it might be an early delivery. But when I saw the name on the screen, my hand froze. Vanessa. Her name appeared clearly, along with the old photo I'd never replaced. Her in a red evening gown, standing next to our parents at her Stanford MBA graduation. 3 years. 3 years without a single call or message. The last thing she said to me was at a cousin's wedding, "Lauren's probably busy watering her lettuce or something." I stood still for a few seconds, then hit accept. "Hello." No reply at first. Just heavy breathing like the person on the other end was swallowing back tears. "Vanessa," I said gently. "Lauren." Her voice cracked like glass in the wind. "You picked up." I didn't know what to say. I felt surprised, but also something faintly familiar like dread. I'm sorry for calling like this, but I don't know what else to do." I sat on the porch steps, setting the tomato basket down by my feet. The wind carried the smell of damp earth and early sun. "What happened?" It's Ryan," she said between sobs. "He borrowed money, invested in some crypto thing. I don't fully understand. Someone promised him double returns in a month. Mom thought he was finally doing something serious. Dad co-signed the loan. And now." Her voice cracked again. I heard the sound of stifled crying on the other end. "And now what?" "Now it's all gone, Lauren. Everything. They're seizing assets. Mom and Dad's house is about to be foreclosed. Their retirement accounts are drained. Any jointly held property is frozen. They have nowhere else to go." I didn't answer right away. My fingers tightened around the phone. Part of me wanted to hang up right then. But I heard her voice, the same voice that once ridiculed me in front of everyone, now shattered like a child's. "Lauren, please. Can he get a bank loan? You two have assets, land. The bank would trust you. Just co-sign a short-term loan so Mom and Dad can keep the house. After that, I'll figure out a way to pay it back." I took a deep breath. The ground beneath me felt like it had shifted. The question wasn't whether I could. It was, why did she believe I would? I stood, walked into the house, making sure the wind wouldn't drown out my answer. "Let me check with my company's financial manager first." The line went dead silent. No sobs, no breathing. Just cold stillness. I tapped the button to end the call and set the phone down. My hand trembled, not from emotion but from something I'd waited years to feel. This moment when those who turned their backs finally returned, knocking. But reality wasn't what I expected. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like someone had torn open a scar that never fully healed. Jake walked in from the back door, still holding the sensor layout for the West Field. He saw my face, didn't ask questions, just placed the papers on the table. "Your sister?" he asked gently. I nodded. "Calling for money?" "Yeah. Ryan lost everything. Parents are about to lose their house. She wants us to take a loan in our name." Jake didn't react immediately. He poured me a glass of water, handed it to me, then pulled out a chair across the table. "How do you feel?" I looked out the window. The summer fields stretched out in green rows, wind brushing through shoulder-high corn. That was our labor. Day by day, sweat by sweat, sunstroke after sunstroke. No one but Jake and I knew how many times we nearly ran out of money, how many times we almost shut down, how many sleepless nights we fought to keep this farm alive. I turned back to look at my husband, the man who had stood beside me when all we had left was enough rice for 1 week. I don't want them to destroy what we built. Jake nodded. Neither do I. But I also don't want to become heartless. I don't want to be the ungrateful daughter who wouldn't help her parents in a crisis. Jake stayed quiet for a moment. Then he said, calm and steady. There's a fine line between kindness and letting people use you. They didn't call for 3 years. They didn't ask if you were alive. And now they show up, not to apologize but to demand. You have the right to say no. I gripped the glass of water in my hand, the ice pressing into my palm bringing me back to focus. I knew Jake was right. But the deepest pain wasn't rejection. It was being treated like I didn't exist until they needed something. Do you think they actually believe we can save them? I asked quietly. Jake gave a small laugh. They still think we're just a couple growing vegetables on some cheap land. They have no idea you're running an AG tech company worth tens of millions of dollars. I let out a laugh too, though it wasn't joyful. I leaned back in my chair, eyes drifting up to the old wooden ceiling, dotted with tiny cracks we hadn't gotten around to fixing. They think I'm so poor I need Jake to co-sign a temporary loan, and they don't even realize. Jake's the one approving weekly budgets for a dozen tech projects. Jake raised an eyebrow. So, what do you want to do? I stayed quiet. Part of me wanted to drive straight to Illinois and lay down an entire stack of financial reports in front of Vanessa and ask if she still thought I was just the carrot-growing kid sister. But I also knew this wasn't something you could solve with proof. Not right now. All I said was, we're not calling back. If they're really that desperate, they'll come. And when they do, I want them to meet the real Lauren. Not the one they always thought had failed, but the one they completely underestimated. Jake nodded. He stood, wrapped his arm around my shoulders, gave a soft squeeze. The wind across the fields grew stronger, carrying the scent of wildflowers mixed with damp earth. A new chapter had just opened without a name yet. And I had the sense, this wasn't going to end with one phone call. They showed up on a gloomy Saturday morning. Light rain fell as a mist still lingered over the eastern fields, and 3 SUVs turned onto the gravel drive that led to the farm. I was in the kitchen rinsing vegetables when I heard tires crunching over the wet ground. Jake didn't say anything. He just set his coffee mug down, dried his hands, and walked to the front door. I stood still for a few seconds, heart beating slow but heavy, then followed him. The first car door opened. My mother stepped out wearing a beige coat, clutching a massive handbag like she was headed to a board meeting. My father followed behind her, carrying a classic black briefcase. Vanessa stepped out of the second car, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky, her white dress fluttering lightly in the wind. Ryan came last, looking thinner than I remembered, hands in his pockets, eyes downcast. No one smiled. No one even offered a polite hello. My father stepped forward, documents in hand. Lauren. Jake. He nodded, trying to stay composed. We need to talk. Jake opened the door, nodded slightly in invitation. My mother glanced around, trying to hide a flicker of disappointment. The farm looks tidier than I expected, she said, her eyes lingering on the lavender rose lining the fence. Still a bit rustic. I didn't respond, just motioned for them to step into the living room. The old sofa Jake and I bought from a retired farmer still held the scent of aged leather, and the coffee table Jake built himself gleamed from weekly polish. Vanessa scanned the room like she was searching for something to criticize, but said nothing. My father opened his briefcase, pulling out a stack of papers. We won't waste time, he said evenly. This is a land transfer agreement. If you two agree to sell, we can settle most of the debt. The buyer is ready to put down a deposit within the week. I looked at him, not angry, just as if I were staring at a stranger wearing a familiar face. Sell the farm. This is the most valuable asset left in the family, he continued. And clearly you've already taken it as far as it can go. Maybe it's time to move on to something more stable. Jake said nothing. He stepped into the adjacent room, what visitors often assumed was a storage shed. We want to show you something first, I said, rising from my seat. The whole family followed, uncertain. The room wasn't a shed. Motion sensors lit up a spacious control center, complete with sleek workstations, a large LED screen displaying thermal maps of the fields, servers humming with quiet power. Soil analyzers, a 3D printer for replacement parts, and a project board lined the wall. My mother actually stepped back a little in surprise. What is this?" she asked. Jake turned calmly. This is the operations center of Verdant Tech Incorporated, our company. From here, we manage irrigation systems, monitor soil health, and conduct real-time agricultural data analysis for over 100 farms across the Midwest. Vanessa pulled off her sunglasses, the shock finally breaking through. You have a company? I walked to the desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a folder. I laid it on the table. Our latest financial report, intellectual property certificates for 4 patents, and a letter confirming federal funding from the United States Department of Agriculture. This is the confirmation for a 3-year research grant worth $5 million, I said, my voice calm. This is a record of positive cash flow for 2 consecutive years. And these are signed contracts with large-scale agriculture partners from Missouri to Wisconsin. My mother picked up a sheet and read silently, her hands trembling slightly. Ryan stood frozen, like waking from a bad dream. My father slowly set the land contract down, lips pressed tight. Vanessa sat down, hands on her knees, eyes unfocused. You've been running this company. How long? She asked, voice hollow. 5 years, I replied. And 7 years since we started from nothing. My father stared at me, his gaze sharp as a blade. Why didn't you say anything? Because no one asked, I said. Just like no one asked how I was living, what I was doing, if I was okay. All anyone ever said was, she lives on a farm. That was enough. No one spoke for several minutes. Only the hum of the ceiling fan filled the heavy silence. Jake pulled out a map of the land, pointing to various zones on the large screen. This land isn't just where we live. It's a laboratory, a command center, the birthplace of every regenerative agriculture project we've built. If we sell, we don't just lose property, we lose the company, 20 jobs, and 17 ongoing partner projects. My father frowned. But Lauren, we're family. We're your parents. I said nothing. Something inside me cracked, not from anger but from a deep sorrow that had never found a name. Family, they came not to apologize, not to admit they were wrong. They came because they still thought I was the helpless little sister who could be pressured with guilt and blood ties. And because you're family, I said slowly, I hoped you'd understand, there are things that can't be bought with parental rights. I pulled the folder back toward me, resting my hand on it like it was my very life. The room stayed quiet, but no longer the silence of tension. It was the silence of people realizing the game they were used to playing no longer worked in the world I lived in. As the operations room door opened, Jake turned to me, giving a subtle nod. I followed his gaze and saw a man step in, wearing a neat gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase, composed like someone used to entering high-pressure rooms. He wasn't tall, but his voice, low and firm, pulled the entire room in the moment he spoke. Hello. I am Benjamin Ford, the legal counsel representing Verdant Tech Incorporated. My father frowned. A lawyer? Why would we need a lawyer here? Jake answered for me, his voice calm as if speaking to employees during a morning meeting. Because we anticipated the purpose of today's visit. And because this is no longer just a family matter. Ford opened his briefcase, pulling out several folders and neatly arranging them on the wooden table in the middle of the room. First, to clarify, the entire cultivated land area, including the original 10 acres and the additional 6 acres to the north, is not personally owned by Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell but is the property of Verdant Tech Incorporated, a privately held corporation established and registered in the state of Iowa since 20XX. He glanced over the crowd that was starting to lose its bearings. Vanessa sat upright, trying to maintain her composure. My mother took a half step back. My father looked at Mr. Ford as if to interrupt but didn't dare. Next, Mr. Ford said, flipping to the next document. The aforementioned parcels are part of federally sponsored research under Section 52.8 regarding sustainable agricultural technology development. This means any forced sale, mortgage, transfer, or misuse of the land for purposes outside the research violates federal law and can result in both civil and criminal liabilities. I saw Vanessa's shoulders stiffen. Ryan lowered his head. My father clenched his hands behind his back, his eyes darkened like he had just lost a chess match. I don't understand, my mother said, voice trembling. This is land inherited from Jake's family, isn't it? How can it not be personal property? Jake nodded lightly. Originally it was inherited land. But from the first year we transferred ownership to the company to serve as a research headquarters. partly to qualify for certain tax exemptions, partly to legally protect our patents within a controlled technical environment. All procedures were legal and notarized. Ford smiled as if to confirm. I personally handled most of the paperwork. Vanessa looked around, her voice hoarse. So, no one in the family has rights to touch this land? It can't be divided? It can't be used as joint property. That's correct, Mr. Ford replied. And to avoid misunderstandings, since the land is not under individual names, it is not included in any wills or inheritances of the Carter or Stone families. Nor can it be used as collateral to rescue bad investments of any third party. My mother exhaled sharply, lips trembling. My father frowned, glancing at Vanessa as if waiting for her to say something to save the situation. But at that moment, Mr. Ford pulled out another file, this time with a blue cover, bearing the logo of a large media company in the corner. There is one more thing I think you should know, he said, glancing at Vanessa. About 8 months ago, your company, Carter PR Group, sent a proposal for media partnership and brand recognition campaign to an agricultural technology company named Verdant Tech Incorporated. Vanessa blinked repeatedly. I don't remember. The proposal was rejected, Mr. Ford continued without missing a beat, because the CEO, Lauren Mitchell herself, did not see the need to collaborate with a party that had publicly disparaged her company's production model at public events. The room went silent as if the air had been sucked out. Vanessa opened her mouth but could not speak. Her face went pale. I looked directly into her eyes, neither smiling nor blaming, letting the truth speak for itself. Why didn't you say it was your company? She whispered as if asking herself. Because at the time, I replied slowly, I wanted to see if you really believed in our values or were just trying to land a contract with a trendy green tech company. You didn't need to know who was behind it. You just needed a name for quarterly reports. Vanessa said nothing. My mother stepped toward her daughter, placing a hand on her shoulder but was gently shrugged off. Ryan stood still, head down. My father turned to Mr. Ford, voice hard as stone. So, what do you intend to do next? Nothing, Mr. Ford smiled politely. We have no intention to sue or force anything. We just want everyone to understand one thing. Verdant Tech is not a place to be dragged into other people's financial crises. Even if those people are family. Jake looked around, then turned to me. I nodded lightly. His hand rested firmly on my shoulder, steady like this farm itself, once looked down upon, now the foundation of a future they never expected. I thought everything had been revealed. Thought nothing could stun me more after Verdant Tech was opened before them like a book they never bothered to read. But it turned out, there were old truths lying silent for decades, just waiting for the right moment to explode like a punch in the chest. My mother stood near the window, eyes fixed on the distant fields where the sunlight was fading on dew-soaked earth. She clenched her hands tightly, knuckles pale. No one spoke for a long time until she finally broke the silence. Lauren, there's something I've never told you. I stayed seated, hands on my lap, back straight, heart suddenly beating faster for no clear reason. My eyes watched her but my mind rummaged through old memories, looking for anything unusual. Mom, you once received a letter from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. MIT, she said slowly. An invitation for you to join a summer research prep program before your junior year of college. It could have been a stepping stone to transfer fully. I said nothing. My throat felt dry like someone had stuffed a handful of dirt down it. Mom hid it, she continued, voice dropping as if she didn't want to hear her own words. She left the letter in the bottom drawer and never gave it to you. Then, she tore it up after a few weeks. Why? I asked, not realizing my voice had fallen into an almost emotionless monotone. It was flat, empty like my chest at that moment. Because we needed you close, my mother answered, eyes still not leaving the window frame. Ryan had just been kicked out of school. Your dad had lost his job temporarily. Vanessa had just graduated and was unemployed. The family was falling apart. And you were the responsible, rational one. Rational for what? I asked, voice beginning to tremble. To stay and do what? My mother turned around. She didn't cry. She just stood there with the face of a woman who had made a decision long ago and believed she was right. To keep the family from breaking. To care for Ryan. To be the anchor everyone relied on. I chuckled softly, a laugh slipping out like a small blade tearing paper. So you chose to sacrifice the future of the only child who had a chance to step out into the world for the son who refused to grow up? Ryan froze, about to say something, but then looked down. Vanessa turned her face away. Jake, who had been quietly standing by the wall, stepped forward and placed a hand on my shoulder. But that hand stayed only a second before dropping. He withdrew without a word, walking straight outside, his heavy footsteps pounding on the earth, the door closing behind him like cutting off a rushing stream. I didn't watch him leave. I didn't need to ask why he went out. At that moment, I knew Jake was holding back an emotion he had never shown me before. Real anger. My mother took a step toward me, but I raised my hand to stop her. You don't need to come any closer. I just need one answer. Do you think I deserve to be chosen? Did you ever believe that if I left, I would still come back if you needed me, rather than having to tie me down like that? At the time, I wasn't thinking that far ahead, she whispered. I only saw a capable, responsible daughter, always ready to take on burdens. I thought, you were stronger than us. Being strong doesn't mean you don't need to be chosen, I said, my lips trembling beyond my control. Being strong doesn't mean it doesn't hurt to be betrayed. My father, who had been silent until then, finally spoke in a dry voice. We're not proud of that. But at the time, the family was in crisis. You wouldn't understand. No, Dad, I cut in. I understand. I understand all too well. I understand so well that I lost my youth trying to become the useful version of a child, only to still be seen as a failure, just because I wasn't Vanessa. Vanessa tried to speak, but this time Ryan put his hand on hers and gently shook his head. She sat silently, clenching her hands. I stood up, feeling the space in the room shrink and weigh down like a box sealed too long. All these years I thought I wasn't good enough, worthy enough, or like the image my parents painted. Now I realized I'd been controlled silently, not by whips or scolding, but by expectations and manipulation wrapped in the guise of for the family. I turned my back, staring out the window at the endless fields. My mother's voice echoed behind me, soft as the wind through leaves. You'll never forgive me, will you? I didn't answer, because I still didn't know. All I knew was I had just lost something I thought I was familiar with. And in that moment I began to understand. Sometimes pain doesn't come from strangers, but from the hands closest to you. I stood in the operations room, where gentle light from the window slid diagonally across the white wall. The contract papers still lay on the wooden table, next to cultivation maps and unfinished research reports. This room, once a place for strategy meetings, had become the courtroom of a family trial I never willingly joined. I looked at each person, Dad, Mom, Vanessa, Ryan, for familiar faces from over 30 years of my life, now so shockingly distant. They no longer had the eyes of people who thought they controlled the situation. Instead, there was confusion, exhaustion, and weakness. Strange how, after all these years I'd struggled to be seen, it was in this very moment, when I no longer tried, that they truly saw me. No contracts will be signed today, I said, every word clear, neither harsh nor angry. Just the truth. Vanessa shook her head softly, tears streaming down her cheeks. Lauren, you don't understand. We have no way out. You can save the whole family. No, I interrupted. I understand perfectly. And because I do, I say this too. Not a single penny from my company will be used to fix your mistakes. My father lowered his gaze. He didn't respond, argue, or try to find another excuse. He just stood there, hands limp, as if finally reaching his own limit. Perhaps he understood all the cards had been laid out, and there was nothing left to negotiate. The sound of my mother's knees hitting the floor startled everyone. She knelt, her whole body shaking as she grasped my hand. Father, I beg you. If not for me, then for Tiffany. She's only 8. She's done nothing wrong. If this family falls apart, she will have nowhere to go. I pulled my hand back gently but firmly. It's not because I'm heartless, I replied, still looking at her, but because this is the first time I truly feel alive for myself. No longer carrying the burden of duty, no longer playing the part of the good, enduring, sacrificing daughter. I'm not turning my back on Tiffany. I'm just refusing to pay for mistakes my parents made. My mother broke down crying. For the first time I saw her cry, not for pride, not for lost property, but because she stood before a child she no longer had the power to guide. Ryan sat quietly, shoulders trembling slightly. I wasn't sure if he was crying, but something in his silence made me feel at least one person understood me more than they thought. Vanessa stepped forward. No longer perfect, her makeup smudged, hair messy, voice hoarse. I'm not this kind of person. Lauren, I'm not the one to give up on family. You're right, I answered. I wasn't either. But that was before I realized, in this family, love always comes with conditions. You're only loved if you're useful, if you know when to step back, know when to stay silent, know how not to make things difficult. And I did all that, for more than 20 years. I turned to look at Dad. You told me if I pursued environmental biology no one would hire me. You said studying plants was a waste of time. But the technology built from those useless things is what's now saving the land this whole region depends on. Do you remember? Do you remember the night I sat at dinner holding that scholarship letter while you told me to put it aside and focus on real things? My father looked up. His eyes were cloudy like a fog. At the time, I thought I was doing the right thing. Thought, I repeated, just like Mom thought hiding the MIT letter was for the greater good. But those thoughts twisted my whole life. No one spoke. I stepped back, smoothing my shirt. Inside there was no fiery anger like before. Only clarity, like a long road finally revealed, no longer shrouded in the fog of duty and expectation. Is there anything else you want to say? I asked. The question wasn't a challenge but a necessary conclusion to a conversation where I was the last to keep balance. Vanessa stepped back. Ryan bowed his head. My mother sat down, red-eyed, staring into space. My father, the pillar, the final voice in every decision, stood silently, his hands starting to shake. I turned and walked toward the table, gathering the company papers. When I looked back, the whole room remained as still as when I left my seat. My door remains open, I said softly. But if you step inside, no one brings old things with them. No power. No pity. No forced promises. Only truth. And respect. Then I turned away, leaving them standing in the room, not the center of the world they once knew, but people who had just been removed from the throne of power in the very family they used to control. I have no regrets. And in the last look I saw reflected in the glass, perhaps, they were beginning to realize one thing. I am no longer the Lauren they once knew. 1 week after that confrontation, I received a handwritten letter in the old wooden mailbox at the end of the road, where rarely anything was sent except bills and government documents. The envelope was ivory, the slanted handwriting clearly from someone who hadn't held a pen in a long time. I opened it, read through once, then had to sit on the porch step to read it again. The letter was from Ryan. Lauren, you might not believe it, but I wrote and tore up this note 3 times before daring to send it. Not because I was afraid you'd be mad, but because I wasn't sure I still deserved a reply. I witnessed everything that day without saying a word. Like my whole life, I chose to stand on the sidelines, silent while others got hurt. But this time, I don't want to be silent anymore. I want to say, I'm sorry. Not just for the years I didn't stand up for you, but for a past I was a part of that caused you to suffer. Maybe you didn't know, or never cared to, but Mom and Dad told me flat out to ditch all my nonsense to make way for Vanessa. They said a family can't have 3 standout kids. And because the eldest had a bigger chance, I had to step back. They said, Lauren won't embarrass us. She'll know better. And you did know better. To the point of sacrificing your future. As for me, I sacrificed myself and still couldn't do anything. Lauren, if you'll allow me, I want to start over. Not to be your savior or anything grand. I just want to do something right for myself. I folded the letter, my hand still trembling a little. I thought of Ryan, the stubborn, lazy younger brother once branded as useless in the family's eyes. I thought of the nights Ryan played games in his room, Mom and Dad scolding, while I was always the good example. I'd never really looked at Ryan as someone trapped too, just in a different cage. That afternoon, I wrote Ryan a short letter inviting him to come work as a technician at the farm. Not as a gift but as a door. I left it for Ryan to step through if he wanted. 2 days later, an old navy blue pickup truck stopped at the gate. Jake looked out the window, raised an eyebrow. Got a visitor. It's my brother, I replied, then washed and dried my hands before stepping out to greet him. Ryan leaned against the truck, holding an old backpack, looking uncertain. I reached him, but before I could say anything, he spoke first. I'm not good at technical stuff, but I learn fast. If I mess up, just tell me straight. I smiled and nodded. Here, no one expects perfection. Just a willingness to learn and respect for the land. Ryan smiled, visibly relieved. He followed me to the southern soil test area, where we were researching microbial restoration of the cultivation layer. Jake observed from a distance, then stepped over and shook Ryan's hand like a teammate. No one mentioned the past. Everything started with work. And work, little by little, gave Ryan back a part of the value the family once took away. As for Vanessa, she remained silent since that day, but I heard from a friend that she started working with a private lawyer, suing a partner who canceled a media contract. I wasn't sure if she knew that partner was my company. Maybe she did. Maybe not. But one thing I'm certain of is she wasn't ready to look back yet. My parents also made no contact. Jake received an email from a group of lawyers representing them, but it didn't mention any dispute. It was just a proposal for a civil discussion. We didn't respond. Not out of spite. Just because everything was beyond family ties now. When a relationship is bound by control and one-sided sacrifice, it's no longer family, it's a contract. And that contract I no longer sign. That evening, as the air cooled, Jake and I sat on the porch steps, each holding a cup of hot tea. The porch light cast a warm yellow glow over the distant fields where Ryan was checking water sensors in the test rows. Jake was quiet for a long time before asking, "Do you regret it?" I looked at him without hesitation. No. I don't regret it. Sometimes family isn't where you're born. It's where you're recognized. Jake smiled softly, his eyes warmer than the light behind him. And I think, I continued, Ryan is finding that feeling again too. We sat like that for a long time, saying nothing more. The wind carried the smell of freshly turned soil. I heard Ryan's footsteps passing through the grass, the soft whistle of water pipes being checked. Inside me there was no heaviness, no craving for acceptance. Only a peace I knew I had paid enough to have. And perhaps, this was the first time I truly understood what freedom was. Not the kind given, but the kind you take from the closest things. That morning, the sky was unusually clear after several days of light rain. The ground was still damp but not muddy, enough to walk through the test garden without rolling up my pant legs. Jake stood beside me at the front door, holding a tablet synced with data from sensors embedded deep in the soil. Every colored dot on the map was a small breath of this field. And all were working well. The Department of Agriculture's vehicle arrived at exactly 9 a.m., just as scheduled. A silver SUV, neat and clean. The woman who stepped out appeared to be in her early 40s, her hair tied back, bright eyes and purposeful stride. She wore a light blue shirt, khaki pants and durable boots designed for field work. She didn't seem bureaucratic, but there was a way she took in the scene that made me understand. She wasn't here to be persuaded, but to confirm what she had quietly believed for a long time. "Lauren Mitchell?" she asked, approaching and extending her hand. "I'm Susan Blake, Program Director for Funding at the Department of Agriculture." I shook her hand and introduced Jake, who was coming over from the barn with a full printout of the data. "We're honored to have you here," Jake said. "The entire southern test area is ready. We just updated the last 72 hours of data." Susan nodded. "I'm eager to see with my own eyes what you've put in your proposal. On paper it's impressive. But I believe the land usually tells the truth better than documents." We led her along the long rows where cracked, snake-like dry soil during drought had been replaced with thick green kale, lettuce and drought-resistant beans. Susan bent down gently, touching each plant, checking soil moisture by feel, then carefully inspecting the control panel for the installed sensors. No needless compliments, only slow nods, each step firm as if pressing deeply into the years of our silent efforts. It took us 2 years to develop native microbes strong enough to retain water without chemical fertilizers, I said as we walked past the test plot of hybrid corn. And nearly another year and a half to write the algorithm forecasting soil degradation points based on the Southwest climate model. Susan stopped and looked at me. "You're not someone who gives up easily." I smiled. I used to think I was soft-hearted. But the land taught me how to stand firm. And Jake taught me how to believe in things no one else did. "We need more people like you," Susan said. "Not for the technology, but for the ability to endure silence and work when no one's watching." We ended the tour by returning to the office area, the place that had silenced my parents during that meeting. Jake opened the presentation of test results, each line of data appearing clear and powerful, like an undeniable statement. I didn't need to say much. The numbers told our story. Susan sat quietly after the documents ended. Then she took a pen from her bag and signed a temporary release form. "I'll send this to Washington today," she said. "We approve a $15 million grant over 3 years, phased for implementation in states most affected by drought. Verdant Tech will lead the testing." I didn't answer immediately. My eyes followed outside the window where Ryan was rebuilding test racks in the far field, sleeves rolled up, posture steady. Further beyond was the small gray wooden house Jake and I had lived in at the beginning. The house that once leaked, had no hot water, was where I cried silently through cold, windy nights. Now it stood there peacefully, a witness. "Thank you," I said, voice almost a whisper. "Not for the money, but for seeing what many refused to look at." Susan stood up, shook both our hands again. "I'll be back," she said, "but next time, probably to have dinner with the people I admire." The car left the farm gate late that morning. A small flag bearing the Verdant Tech logo fluttered in the breeze, mounted on the main post at the exhibit entrance. It wasn't large or flashy, but it was enough for passers-by to understand that something was starting here, where once it was dismissed as just a patch of vegetable land. Jake took my hand as we walked toward the western fields, the place where we planted the first seeds. The rows were now lush and straight, and among the trees small sensors still lit up, proof of sleepless nights, countless trial and error, and decisions we made without support. I looked toward the house, then at Jake. No one believed we could make it happen. Jake nodded, eyes fixed on the rows ahead. "But it doesn't matter if anyone believes. As long as you believe in me. And I believe in you." I squeezed his hand gently, a smile flickering at the corner of my mouth. Above us, the wind continued to blow, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass, soft soil dust, and something very real. A kind of faith that needs no declaration, no repayment, just living true to it every day. If anyone ever asked me how a girl who was pushed away from an opportunity at MIT, who once lived in a mobile home amid cracked fields, could lead a company that changed how we farm and regard the land, the simple answer is, I didn't do it alone. I did it with a man who believed in me, with a team who believed in decency, and with this land, where no recognition is needed, only to be heard. Maybe you've been called not enough. Maybe your family told you to be realistic. But I want to ask you, if you ever had to choose between living by what you believe or living to please others, what did you choose? And if you had to choose again, would you have the courage to choose yourself? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you've been through, and how you stood back up. If my story touched something inside you, please follow the channel. Because I still have many things to tell, not just about Jake, Ryan, or the drought-stricken fields, but about how we keep nurturing, renewing, and sometimes forgiving.